Good evening and welcome. Tonight we will be going over the history and geography of Alabama in the United States. I know a lot of you have been waiting in my series for me to get to the States, and we have made it. If it's your first time watching my channel, I'm covering every little piece of the planet in alphabetical order. So we have arrived at A, L, A, B, A, M, A, Alabama. Alabama is located in a region primarily known as the South. In the United States, Southern culture is very, very distinct in terms of food, language, culture, etc. It's very, very different culture from the rest of the United States in many ways. Alabama's geography has three different regions. Up here in the northern section, we have a very beautiful landscape. It is very forested and has a unique makeup of the land here. This is sort of where the Appalachian Mountains begin. The Appalachians being very old, very rounded mountains, newer peaks are very jagged and sharp, but as time wears them down, they get soft and round. And that's what the landscape here looks like. It looks like that the mountainous areas of the region have been around for such a long time that they are very lumpy and smooth. Not to mention there's lots and lots of rivers and lakes all throughout the state. But the ones up here have created some really fascinating gorges, canyons, and caves. Really neat. I will show them to you all on Google Earth after the history section. Up here in the north, we have the city of Huntsville, which we'll talk about briefly in its history. This is where a lot of aerospace technology is developed. It's where they build the spacecraft that NASA uses. It's very cool. It's also where Space Camp is. So neat. If you grew up in my era, I guess the 90s, 2000s, in America at least, on a lot of kids' game shows, one of the grand prizes would be a trip to Space Camp, and it just seemed like the most incredible thing that a child could ever experience. It was hyped up so hard that going to Space Camp would be like the equivalent of winning the lottery as an adult, But yeah, fantasies for millions of children across the US lie here in Huntsville at Space Camp. The middle region here, which stretches about from here to down here, this big middle chunk here, is known as the Black Belt, thusly named because the soil here is black. It is full of nutrients. It is very, very fertile. And the primary crop grown here historically was cotton. So it has kind of a double meaning historically, because kidnapped Africans were used as slaves to tend, pick, and process the cotton. So it is a black belt in more ways than one, but it was originally named that because the soil is black, which is kind of interesting. I don't think I've ever seen black soil except for when it's wet, It's in this region, which, as you can assume, it's the big farming region, but we also have major cities such as Birmingham, the largest city in Alabama, and yes, Europeans, mostly the Brits, it is pronounced Birmingham in Alabama. Everything's pronounced a little differently, not just in the United States, but definitely in the South. It's Birmingham. And you can find the capital city of Montgomery there as well. And then in the southern region down here, it gets very, very marshy. Think bayous, think Everglades. It gets really wet and damp, and you get that kind of bayou Everglades kind of wildlife landscape, like alligators and birds and hanging ferns and mossy things, swampy things. It's very bayou core, I guess you'd call it. You can find the major city of Mobile down here, and yes, it is pronounced Mobile. And there's also some really cool islands down here in Mobile Bay. In particular, there's Dolphin Island right there, which we'll look at on Google Earth. It's really interesting. But in a nutshell, that is the geography of Alabama. It borders Mississippi, Tennessee, Georgia, and the Florida Panhandle. Which, if you're wondering why the shape is so unusual down here, let's talk about it in its history. So, the earliest established settlement in Alabama would have been in the town of Moundville, which is right here. It wasn't called Moundville then. This was a city established by the native peoples of the region. There were many different tribes throughout Alabama. Alabama is the name of one of them. They were the more central tribe. But Moundville, if you know the Cahokia Mounds further north up in, Missouri, Ohio. It's the same thing, that they made these huge earth mounds, and on top were most likely important homes for the most important people of the city, and the rest of the town would be around these mounds. It was a huge city. The Cahokia being the largest pre-European city in what's now the United States, Moundville was the second. So it was a very big city. It existed sometime between the years 1000 and 1600 CE. And quite like Cahokia, I believe at least, we're not quite sure what happened there, because once Europeans arrived, it's not like there was a major metropolitan center there. It was pretty abandoned, so we're not quite sure what went on there, but we do know it was there. I'll show you on Google Earth, I promise. The first European to arrive in what's now Alabama would have been Hernando de Soto from Spain in the year 1540. He would have been in this region here. And the first permanent European settlement would have been down here as well. In 1702, the French built the city of Old Mobile down here, which makes sense why it's pronounced like that. It was originally Mobila, the Spanish name. Then the French version would be Mobile, and that's become Mobile. I'll show you on Google Earth, but there are many, many, many different French-named places. I mean, we have Dolphin Island, right? It's a French word for prince. But there's a lot of French places down here, because this was a little French area for a long, long time. It wouldn't be until the 7 Years' War that the British wound up taking it over, and it became part of a territory known as British West Florida, which was essentially this section here. You had Florida and then West Florida. So this chunk here would have been West Florida, which is why we have this division here. Very interesting. It would wind up joining the United States after the American Revolution. Part of it was won back by Spain or until 1783, when the area became fully part of America, and Alabama would become the 22nd state in the United States on December 14th, 1819. Sorry, I did read that wrong. It was part of Spain in 1783 until 1813, after the War of 1812 and all the dust settled from that. It was a very chaotic time in this corner of the world. Sorry, I read that wrong. It became a state in 1819. Now, this is when a lot of people started moving into this very soil-rich area to seek their fortunes in growing cotton, especially after the invention of the cotton gin made cotton production so much faster. But growing cotton is very arduous, very tiring. The sun here is very hot. The humidity is out of this world. And cotton plants are very scratchy. They cut up your hands. They're very, like raw cotton is very uncomfortable to hold. You have to, smooth it out to make it feel like the cotton clothes that you wear now. So many people wanted the riches of growing cotton without the back-breaking labor of growing and processing the cotton. So their solution was to bring in kidnapped Africans to work these cotton plantations for them. And they brought in hundreds of thousands of slaves from Africa. They, I forgot the numbers, but they very much outnumbered the number of white people that lived in Alabama. It was a massive population. And Alabama was one of those states that was very determined to keep the institution of slavery, since it was making people very, very, very wealthy. They didn't want to give that up. So once the idea of the slave states breaking away from the United States in order to keep the institution of slavery, Alabama was very excited about that, and it withdrew from the Union in, oh gosh, I forgot the year. I wrote it down. 1861. There it is. I skipped a little fact. I'll come back to it. 1861. Alabama joined the Confederacy. In fact, Montgomery was the capital of the Confederacy for a hot minute. I think that's where Jefferson Davis was from. Something like that. One of the top brass of the Confederacy lived in Montgomery. I think it was Jefferson Davis, or maybe Robert E. Lee. I can't remember. I honestly don't care about these people at all. So the Civil War happened. The people of the South fought for the right to keep slaves, and they wound up losing, being forced to rejoin the United States and being forced to emancipate their slaves. Now, before we get into that, let's talk about the thing I forgot to talk about. I got too caught up in history. In the early 1800s, as people are moving in, establishing plantations, bringing their slaves, buying up as much land as possible, there were still native people living here, trying to live out their lives as normally as they could, and more Americans, white people, were moving into their land, and they wanted it bad. So after some resistance from the native peoples here, the government was like, well, if these people are going to be violent, we can't have them around. It was like a good excuse, right? So the Indian Removal Act was signed in 1830, which forced, I believe it was all the native peoples here to, I think it was Texas they all got moved to. And of course it wasn't like they caught a train or drove their cars. That obviously was not a thing. They would have to walk. And this was a route known in history as the Trail of Tears, because, forcing people out of their ancestral home in a violent way, forcing them to migrate, is technically a form of genocide. Not great. at all. Very devastating, to be honest. So that's worth mentioning. This is all way before the Civil War happened. And it's like one of the many great American tragedies. When people comment on my videos about like, oh, America's done all these horrible things in the Middle East and to their native peoples, aren't you ashamed? Yes, I am very ashamed. What a dark, dark chapter for this country. Of all the great things to have come out of the United States and the southern region here, the dark chapters really eclipse them because they're just that terrible. They are horrendous. But the Civil War has ended now. Let's hop back to where we were. The Civil War has ended. Alabama is once again a state of the United States, and they have to follow the laws of the United States, which means that they have to release all of the slaves. And the people here, the rich white landowners, of Alabama, were like, well, we can follow the law, but I think we can wiggle it enough so that we still get our way. We still get all of our money, but we're still following the law. So sharecropping became a huge thing in Alabama, which is where these owners divvied up their land into little sections, would sell them to freed black people so that they could still make a profit, off of their land. They would have to give some to the white landowners, and the people actually working the land could keep some. They also started enacting many different laws during and after an era known as Reconstruction, which was the time when the states that had seceded and brought back had to readjust themselves. That's Reconstruction. During and definitely after the Reconstruction era, Alabama, particularly Alabama, the other states did it too, but it was worse in Alabama, were passing laws that are known as Jim Crow laws. Jim Crow being a caricature of a black person meant as like a comedy joke minstrel kind of thing. They called them Jim Crow laws after that caricature. It wasn't an actual person. And these laws were meant to segregate black Americans from white Americans, forcing them to have separate restaurants, separate public restrooms, separate schools was a huge one. Separate everything. Once you have buses and public transit, there were different areas for that. More on that later, very famously. And, it was their little secret loopholes to get around the laws of the United States that all men are created equal, but, making a segregated, separate but equal kind of thing. Which sounds ridiculous now, but, these rich white people had to pat themselves on the back somehow. They did do something even more horrendous to make themselves feel more superior to black people, which was start hate groups, mainly one that starts and ends with the letter K. I don't know how friendly YouTube is with that word, but that sprang up here in Alabama, and their job was to terrorize black people in terrorist fashions, by lynching, by burning, just trying to make sure that these people were being controlled by fear of these white men. They would cover their faces. I assumed because they thought, oh, we're in a secret club and we want them to feel like, we could be their neighbor. But I think it's just a very cowardly kind of thing to do. Like, if you're gonna be racist, just be racist with your whole chest, But that's how it was, and still is in parts of the United States, which is very devastating. But it would all reach a head by the 1960s. But I'm realizing, as I'm saying that, I'm getting ahead of myself real quick. Quick side note in history: in the early 20th century, A little bug known as the boll weevil migrated up from Mexico into the Black Belt area. Boll weevils love to eat cotton like blossoms, like when it first starts to bloom. They gobble that up. So these bugs came in and would eat entire fields of crops, which absolutely devastated the cotton market, tanked it completely. It's still around, but not nearly what it once was. So the people here realized they needed to diversify their economy very quickly. Mining became a thing, and also just regular good old 20th century industrialization, building buildings, cars, any kind of modern equipment that they could slap together in a factory, they started to do. In fact, the city of Birmingham up here was named after the city of Birmingham in the UK, because Birmingham in England is a very industrialized city as well. So it's named after that. But of course, we Americans talk funny, so we can't pronounce anything right. As many people pointed out on my channel, like, I'm sorry, I'm American. It's how I was born. So that was going on. The state was vastly modernizing in terms of the economy, the infrastructure, but not in human rights. It was still very much back in like the 1890s in terms of human rights and equality among people of different races. So, as I was saying, that came to a head in the 1960s when the black community, particularly Birmingham, Montgomery, all the major cities in Alabama, said enough is enough. We need to do something about this. And being inspired by other peaceful protesters around the world, mainly Mahatma Gandhi, the decision was to rise up in a peaceful way to create just inconveniences for the people here, to realize just how much they need this community and how much the state relies on the black community, and force their hand in a nonviolent way. Many examples of this. The first, like off the top of my head, would be Rosa Parks. Rosa Parks was in Montgomery. She boarded a bus. The buses there, the white people got to sit in the front, the black people had to sit in the back. She sat in the front. And when a white man said, "I need to sit there," she refused to get up. She had to be pulled off the bus by the police and was arrested. So, a good form of peaceful protest. And I'm going to mention this in the video tomorrow. I already filmed it. It'll be about Alabama too. How it's kind of portrayed in history as she was just tired that day and got on the bus after a long day of work and just was too exhausted to move. That's not the case. It was all coordinated. There were other women who did this as well. It's just her story made the headlines. It inspired a young pastor in Montgomery named Martin Luther King Jr. to create the bus boycott. And pretty much all of the black people in Montgomery did not ride the bus. They walked everywhere, they ride-shared, did everything they could to get around except riding the bus. And that lasted about a year until the public transit here gave in and said, fine, we can allow people to ride wherever they want on the bus. And that was a huge, huge victory. Another one in Montgomery was the Freedom Riders. The buses, not just locally but internationally in this area, were also segregated. So imagine you wanted to ride from, say, like Washington, D.C., Boston, and you needed to come down to Montgomery. If you were a person of color, there would be a point where the bus would stop. You'd have to get up, rearrange, and ride in a certain designated spot until you got back. Well, the Freedom Riders said, Absolutely not. They would refuse to move, and they would just ride the bus down in whatever seats they wanted. What's interesting about the Freedom Riders, from what I know about it in its history, correct me if I'm wrong, but the Freedom Riders were peoples of all nationalities. From what I remember, I should have probably double checked this before I filmed it, but from what I remember in like high school, it was black people, it was white people who, wanted to end segregation. All different kinds of races would participate. So, you got to the point where you got to move around. Even the white people would say, no, I'm going to sit here in the black section. I'm going to let this black person sit next to me. And that was huge because a lot of these buses were targeted by hateful people, were firebombed and things like that. So it became a very dangerous thing to do. Nevertheless, people would still do it to protest that policy. It is very ridiculous. Looking back on it, as being a person at this time in history, you're like, wow, that sounds terrible. That you could just force people to move because of their race. But at the time, that was the MO in Alabama. One of the worst segregated places in the United States was Birmingham. It was very, very intense there. And very famously, Dr. King was doing peaceful protests there when he was arrested and put in jail. And that's where he wrote the letter from Birmingham jail, which wound up being published all across the United States, really put the spotlight on Alabama and gave it national attention. I don't think that's what he was trying to do when he wrote it, but it certainly worked out that way, didn't it? Another peaceful protest led by Dr. King was the March from Selma. You can see Selma right here. The protest in Selma was against voting rights. At the time, since about like 1901, Alabama had changed its voting registration laws to where you had to pay a poll tax and you had to take a test, and it was obviously unfairly skewed toward rich white people. The poor workers couldn't afford to pay a poll tax, and these tests were very unjustly cruel. There's a really good movie called Selma, where the opening scene, one of the opening scenes, there's kind of a montage, is Oprah Winfrey as a woman trying to register to vote, and the white man there is giving her a deliberately extra super hard exam and fails her because it's like even I couldn't answer those questions. Really good movie. Please check it out if you want to see some good Alabama civil rights history. It's great. So Dr. King helped out here because the people protested. They did a peaceful march across the big bridge there. Was it the Norman Pettus? We'll look at it on Google Earth. And they were attacked by the National Guard. It was very, very violent. So Dr. King went there to march with them. And, at this time he'd won the Nobel Peace Prize. He was a huge figure, not just in the United States, but around the world. So are you going to attack, this celebrity? And he and his group marched from Selma to Montgomery to protest voting rights. And, of course, Dr. King and the many other there were a lot of people involved in the civil rights movement. Just Dr. King is the big figurehead. But there were many, many others. Too many to mention. John Lewis, I want to say, just because he passed away very recently. But many others, including his wife, Coretta, Many others were involved in the civil rights movement and managed to pass two very important laws in the United States, one being the Civil Rights Act, of 1964, which guaranteed all Americans had equal rights no matter what. They had to remove segregated everything. And the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which outlawed poll taxes and these hard exams. You know, every American over the age of 18 has the right to vote, regardless of gender, skin color, etc. So, big impact on history there. Well, thanks to Alabama. And it is important to note that at least like 90% of the people of Alabama, let's say, really embrace that period of civil rights history. They are proud of the impact that that had on America and are ashamed of what it was like before. I'm going to show you some really cool museums in Montgomery that illustrate that. Most people, you know who isn't, but most people are very proud that those protests happened here and that they changed America for the better. I should mention that. All right, let me check my notes for any other facts. I wrote the Huntsville Space Center was built in the 1970s, early 1970s, to build the spacecraft to send us to the moon and beyond. And I wrote down 2004 Hurricane Ivan. As you can imagine, this area here is very prone to hurricanes. I think that was the last big one that really slammed Alabama in particular. I'm pretty sure. They also get tornadoes and things too, but I feel like hurricanes are the most prominent weather disaster in Alabama. Alabama is still a place that is divided. It's not legal, you know. It's more of a cultural and economic divide, that the black communities of the major cities of Alabama are still living in poverty. It's just that long after effect of slavery still. It's a culture and a community still trying to recover from that, and not having many opportunities to do so. There are some bright spots, such as Tuskegee is located here, with a thriving college. It started as a teaching school, and you know, is improving the lives of many black people, not just in Alabama, but all across the U.S. And, you know, it's just, Alabama is not the richest state in the Union. It has a lot going against it. It's very rural in most places, and just the gap between rich and poor is still absolutely massive today. So, I think that's enough of history. I could go on about more details about the civil rights movement and stuff, but I think I'm going to cap it there so I can pull out the tablet, because there are definitely things I want to show you in Alabama. Let me pick this up very carefully because I keep jostling the camera, making noise whenever I grab the tablet. Okay, here we go. Here's Alabama. I'm on the crease of my book. I'm just going to have to hold it like this. Here we have Alabama. Now let me go like this and zoom out so you can see exactly where we are in the world if you're not quite sure where Alabama is located. So this is considered the South down here of the United States. Even though, you know, it's southeast, it's still called the South. And if we zoom out, you can see it's just above the Gulf of Mexico here. And yeah, definitely you can see the green area versus the mountainous brown area over here. It's definitely right smack dab in the green part of the United States. So let's get in closer. The slideshow's not great. We're not going to look at it. Let's start north and make our way down. So you can see the really incredible landscape here. From above, it's like, well, look at all these swirls of dark green. You know, it's really cool. But like once you get close, it's a little harder to see. For example, this huge scar in the land here is a big canyon. This is caused by the river flowing through here, and it just looks like this huge gash just across the land, like someone just took a knife and went pew like that. But when you get closer, let's go to 3D and get closer. It doesn't really look like that at all. It looks very lumpy, very wet and marshy and green, very mashed potato-y. It doesn't look very straight at all. It's really interesting how from above it just looks like this huge long gash. We've got a thing here for the Trail of Tears. Museum in Bridgeport, Alabama. Let's see if there's any good pictures here. There's a train. I don't think so. I try to find some cool stuff about the Trail of Tears. Couldn't really find any. What's this? Monument relocated from original location because they built a highway. Old Alabama welcomes you sign. And then here's a little historical marker telling you about the Trail of Tears. Interesting. Yeah, I try to find, there is a museum that I can show you, but it's, the pictures for it aren't the best. So I was looking all over trying to find anything else for Trail of Tears. I hadn't found it, and then of course that pops up. But, you know, what I was wanting to show you was how, like, how different this landscape is from above than it is up close, you know. Really, really cool. I found a cool cave somewhere up here I wanted to show you. Russell Cave National Monument. It looks very eerie, but the slideshow shows us pictures. Isn't that beautiful? It's very indicative of the landscape here. That this used to be a home for many prehistoric peoples. They had a whole little community here. So gorgeous, right? The rest of the pictures aren't that great, but I just wanted you to see that. A good example of like what the caves look like here. So like I said, lots of canyons, lots of caves, lots of neat little valleys and rivers crisscrossing this really interesting landscape. There's not a lot of landscapes like this in the United States. Let's head down here. Let's check out Birmingham. If there's anything to see here in Birmingham. We've got, yeah, this is like eager to show me museums, which is really great. I appreciate it. But mostly lots of parks and things. Let's see if there's like a good slideshow for Birmingham. Can see some of the big buildings here. Lots of very old buildings, mixed in with very new buildings. Lots of monuments. It's just a big old city, old churches here. Yeah, just a big old bustling metropolitan area there. Oh, you didn't, I realized what I forgot looking up at the northern part is we didn't look at Huntsville to see the spaceships. We gotta see. I have to zoom out way far because I get lost in all this green. Huntsville. We gotta look at the U.S. Space and Rocket Center. We gotta look at that. A gigantic space shuttle on this big rocket that they used to launch it up into space. There's a big space friend. That's what the astronauts would return inside. This looks like it was made on Naboo. A Naboo starfighter. More rockets here. Isn't that so neat? Some soldiers there. Little moon lander. Giant watch. What the heck is up with the giant watch? Why is that there? But yeah, a lunar rover. There's the little car they would use, right? On the moon. Very, very neat. And yep, that's where Space Camp is. Where you can pretend you're an astronaut in training for like 5 days. I think that's a Black Hawk helicopter. I'm not sure. If you know me, you know I know nothing about war. It's my least favorite topic. So yeah, we have to look at that. Let's go down to Montgomery. Montgomery, so I can show you some really cool sites there because there are so many museums here. Let's start with the Legacy Museum, which is really something. This displays history of slavery and racism in America, which has some really amazing modern art, some depressing art that's really rough to look at. Lots of good quotes everywhere. That's really powerful, you know, my goodness. Whew. They all say quite a lot, don't they? Some important, I was going to say, are they all black women? I can't tell. And it looks like science, you know? That is so powerful. It says so much. All of these big plaques here, all of these have names on them as well. It says thousands of African Americans are, gosh, I can't read it. But yeah, a bunch of names on those, lots of quotes around. That's a really powerful fountain as well. There's quotes in there as well. Looks like it's for, to remember lynchings, which is when black people would be targeted and murdered. This column stands in honor of the countless thousands of men, women, and children who are undocumented victims of racial terror and lynching. The prison industrial complex system, which is the loophole of the 13th Amendment. If you don't know, the 13th Amendment in the U.S. Constitution says you can't have slavery except for incarceration, which is why there's such a disproportionate number of black people who are arrested and sentenced so extremely. Yeah, powerful stuff. Oh, that's interesting too with the brick. That's really neat. And lots of amazing art pieces at that museum. Let's see. We have the Civil Rights Memorial here. There we go. Really interesting. It's a big circle with like a timeline around it. Until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. It's a big fountain there. Really quite powerful. We also have the Rosa Parks Museum over here, which you gotta see the statues of Rosa Parks. That must be the, let's see, it's a pastor's car. I'm not sure. Maybe how they got rides around during the bus boycott or in cars like that. There's Rosa getting fingerprinted there on that wall art. And here is the bus itself. Oops. The bus where she was arrested, where she began her boycott, or the boycott technically began. We have the Freedom Rioters Museum here. It's in what was the Greyhound station that they would have pulled into on their final destination. Has been made into a museum. Nashville students. Lots more quotes. It's John Lewis, one of the Freedom Riders. All the people who got arrested for refusing to move. And there's pictures of the buses getting attacked. I think one of the actual buses is here. Let me see. It's a photograph of the interior. And there's John Lewis in younger years. Freedom Rides Museum. Come on. There isn't a picture. I thought there was. Or there was an actual bus there. Maybe I saw it somewhere else. We have there's the Capitol building there. You can find that in every state capital of the United States. And here's the first White House of the Confederacy right there. Jefferson Davis. I was right. It was Jefferson Davis. I also just don't care about those people from history. They can kick rocks for all I care. There's lots of other neat houses here that I'm probably not going to find. There's a Scott and Zelda Fitzgerald Museum in one of their houses. There's the like MLK house somewhere around here, and the Baptist church that he preached at. I think you can do like a walking tour around and see all the places that he frequented. Really, really amazing. Just Just like so much preserved history right there. Let's move on to, while we're here, let's check out Moundville. Oh, and then Selma. Whoops. Moundville. Come on. Pop up with something for me so I know where I am. Moundville. Let's see the mounds. The first real city in Alabama was here, and this is what it looks like today. These big earth mounds that were built up so they could be, I guess, like skyscrapers in a way, huh? So that the important places could be higher above the less important people's homes. Very cool. Lots of illustrations here of what life most likely would have looked like. Lots of Native American costumes and artifacts. We've got really cool displays here. That looks very comfortable and fun to be carried like that, showing what life would have been like and what the people would have worn. I love the antlers. Surely that means he was a shaman of some kind, right? But yeah, it's all that's left of a once great city. Now it looks like there's a really cool museum there too. Isn't that neat? Let's look at Selma so we can see the very famous bridge. Let's find Montgomery, then we can find Selma. Birmingham, Montgomery, Selma. The Norman Pettis Bridge, right? That's what it's called. This bridge. So let's look here. There's a National Voting Rights Museum and Institute. Jail cell there. Memorials. Welcome to Selma. Lots of cool memorials here. Tomb of the Unknown Slave and Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. Wow. Lots of artwork. Civil Rights Memorial. Makes sense. I want to see the bridge. Surely there's a better picture. Edmund Pettus Bridge. I was close. What did I say? Norman Pettus? Close enough. Edmund Pettus Bridge. So this was the bridge that they had crossed and were very violently attacked at. Again, check out the movie Selma. It's something to see. The press was there and took photographs of the attack, and they made national headline news. Oof, we don't want to see that. No thank you. Not even in a museum. Let's head down to the south and check out Mobile. Now, I was trying to find some cool places to show you in Mobile. It's a really neat place, lots of good seafood, you know. I thought it was neat how you can see from above the muddy waters, like the muddy bayou waters mixing in with the ocean water in the Gulf of Mexico. I found, hopefully it pops up. Even the History Museum was not that interesting. The Carnival Museum, because I know when you think like Carnival, Mardi Gras, you think of Louisiana, but it's quite a similar culture over here. Carnival, of course, is the holiday before the start of Lent, and the tradition is that you have a royalty, you have a king and queen each year, and all of the royalty robes are here. You can see some statues here showing off what the costumes look like. So exquisite. They are so detailed. But that's kind of part of the Mardi Gras aesthetic, is just to be super, super lavish. You can see the gown and the crown and scepter this queen had, and her long train, snowflake themed. Very Elsa of her. These are gorgeous. King and queen here. Oh, I love that one. I love the little silver feathers there to match the tree. There's some floats here as well for the parades. That's gorgeous. Oh, I love these. This is my favorite one, though. I like that this picture you can see that this was Morgan Billingsley, she was queen in 2015, that looks like. Either 13 or 15. You can see her beautiful dress, her crown, and this peacock train. That is so gorgeous. They are also beautiful, and yeah, you can become king and queen too for Mardi Gras. And here's some more costumes that they would wear in the parades. Lots of cool masks and lots of glitter and shiny things. It's riding on these cool floats. I think it's neat. And then let's head down to Dolphin Island. In tomorrow's video, I'd read it without learning how to pronounce it, so I was like, I'm not sure how to say this place because I speak French, and to me that's Dauphin. But I'm like, I know that's not how they say it there. I know that it's pronounced exactly the same as like a dolphin. It's Dolphin Island. Here we can see, I wanted to show you, it's a very luxurious place. It's like a little town, and then the further you go out here on the spit, you get all the luxurious beachside homes, you know. Very, very fancy. I want to show you this area here because this looks very, very swampy. This is a good little slideshow to show you. Audubon Bird Society. Now, I assume you come here to look at birds, but there's so much more to see. The gorgeous trees and the murky water, lots of footpaths you can take. Beautiful, beautiful scenery. I bet it's humid and loud there. There's the ocean. Danger, alligators present. Stay back from water's edge. Do not leave children or pets unattended. Danger. Let's see some of these danger friends. Oh, there's a bird. Let's see. Oh, there they go. Swimming in the water looking for some big chomps. There's a turtle, looks like. Or maybe the Loch Ness Monster. I was like reading this about all the wildlife here, and then I realized it's in Comic Sans font, and that kind of ruined it for me. But reptiles and amphibians. It's kind of like, will this bite you? Which, yes, yes, no, yes, maybe. Oh my gosh, that will bite you so hard. They will bite you. Oh, here he comes. A big old gator. Pretty hair in there. And little turtles. So anyway, that was all the cool things I wanted to show you in Alabama. I'm sure there's a lot more. So if you go on Google Earth to explore this really interesting state, let me know if you found any other cool spots so I can like pin them in my comments so everyone can go check them out. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this style of content, please consider subscribing. Like I said, going to every little corner of the world. We just did a state in the US. Next, we're going to do a state in Brazil. So be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out. I hope that you found this video relaxing and educational. My hand is free. Oh man. And I hope that you have a very good